start with what is sticky shed syndrome?
So sticky shed syndrome is a condition that affects tapes, or many tapes that were manufactured from the mid-70s really through today. It has to do with the binder of the tape. What happens to the binder of the tape is it's hygroscopic. It absorbs water from the surrounding atmosphere and creates like a gum, when it comes together, it becomes gummy. What happens is that the condition worsens over time, and the tape will eventually stick to itself on the reel. Before it sticks to itself on the reel, if you're putting it on a machine, it'll end up sticking to the guides and leaving a lot of residue on the tape heads. The condition arose from the fact that in 1972 they banned whaling, and up until then, whale oil or derivatives of whale oil were used for hundreds, if not thousands, of specialty lubrication applications and all kinds of engineering applications. Because whale oil has some very specific properties. And whale oil is used as one of the components in the lubrication or in binder system on the reel-to-reel tape. And when they went to a new synthetic lubricant, they found that it was hygroscopic over time and created the problem. So the issue is that not using whales for this type of industrial purposes contributed to the problem, because the new lubricant didn't work as well.
What tapes are going to be affected by this?
Well, a lot of tapes that were made in the 70s that were primarily back-coated tapes, although there's some others. The ones that are affected the most are the Ampex Grandmaster and the Ampex Professional tapes, 400 series tapes made through the 70s and 80s. There's also, in the 90s, and there's also the Scotch tapes, the competing tapes made at the time. Now, unfortunately, most of the professional recordings in all the recording studios worldwide used that Ampex tape. They had like 90% market share. And that's because Ampex brought out those Grandmaster tapes, which were really the best tapes made in terms of output. They were fantastic tapes for high output. So those are the tapes that suffer from sticky shed today. And unfortunately, the latest news is that all the tapes made from Ampex, and then later Quantici, because people thought that Quantici solved the problem, but we're finding that all the tapes made to the end of Quantity tape production, which I think was 2007, they're all turning sticky.
All right, so the problem exists. What do we do about it?
Well, Ampex itself released a technical memorandum on baking tapes to solve the problem, or at least to make those tapes playable again. And they've put out that as a technical release, something like 140 degrees that you bake the tapes for, 140 degrees, 8 hours, that kind of reconstitutes the binder. There's actually another paper, I forget which one it was, but it actually showed the tape under a scanning electron microscope, and could see that baking the tape actually made the tape reconstitute itself close to the way it was at the beginning, in order to use it again. Because of course the first reason people want to bake them is because you have old master tapes in all the vaults. When you're doing remastering, you want to digitize them, you've got to bake them first, because otherwise the tapes can be destroyed. And that's one thing that is very important to let people know. If your tape suffers from sticky shed syndrome, you don't want to play it, because there's a possibility that you'll scrape the oxide off from the tape and you'll ruin it. You can't repair it then.
So should people start putting their tapes in the oven? How do we go about doing this ourselves?
Well, for today, I want to show you the simplest way to do it, and that is to buy yourself a food dehydrator. These things are like $40 on eBay. So this one looks like it's almost purpose-built. I mean, if you take a look at these trays, right, you have a standard, 10.5-inch reel fits into one of these trays perfectly for dehydrating. And there's other equipment available that are similar. Some are a little bit bigger. But these trays are this type of dehydrator is very useful because your temperature is really in the sweet spot of baking the tape. And the reason is because you want to make sure you don't go too much over 140 degrees, because if you bake it too hot, it could be detrimental to the tape or the signal on the tape. If it's too low, it won't work well.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to use your oven at home because they're not designed to control temperature well, and certainly not at that low end
Mm-hmm.
of the spectrum. So I don't recommend using an oven. You can use industrial convection ovens that can with a fine temperature adjustment, but food dehydrators are easier. My opinion, this hobby is expensive as it is. Buying a food dehydrator for $40 is not a big ask
Mm-hmm.
to make those tapes playable again.
How long do they have to be baked for?
I usually do between 4 and 8 hours. Obviously, the thicker tapes need to be baked longer. In terms of wider tapes, like 1/2-inch or 1-inch tapes, because you want to make sure they're fully dehydrated.
And any of the previously recorded material, it's not going to be harmed by this process by baking it, right?
Not in my experience. Not. I think I've heard that if you bake it too high, that it could do something to the high frequencies, but I've never seen it done. I've done it in a lot of ways. I had a previous apparatus that I used, and this is a little bit funny. I built using a cardboard box and a small hair dryer and a meat thermometer
Mm-hmm.
and a flap. I was able to control the temperature at 140,
Mm-hmm.
and it had like a baking rack, and I put the tapes in the rack, and that worked well
Mm-hmm.
because you had the convection of the air to pull the moisture out.
How long is this going to last for once someone bakes a tape?
That's a good question. That's where I think more research needs to be done. I've seen up to a year that you can use the tapes. I've also read that if you use them regularly and actually wind them, that somehow that mechanical effect of
Mhm.
using the tape slows down that process, that it's worse when it sits. That's something that we're doing research for. Actually, I have some research ongoing with some tapes that I've baked and some time stamps, and I'm going to be looking at seeing how you can use them over time. Because if you can use them over time, and this is, I think, what's controversial, because most of the people in the community say just toss it, throw it away, right? It's garbage. Well, maybe not. If tape is so expensive, if it costs $100 for a new 1/2-inch tape like this, right? If it costs $100, and you already have this, you already own these, and you want to use it again, well, maybe baking it, why not try it,
Mhm.
right? It's why not?
One of the biggest things I see people say online in regards to this issue is baked tapes are going to act like sandpaper on tape heads. Your precious tape heads that you want to, treat with kid gloves, right? Is there any truth to this?
It's a good question. I actually don't know the answer to that question. If the binder is reconstituted, and that research paper showed that for the most part it's reconstituted, I don't see how that would happen. If you have a real loss of lubricant to the point where it's going to be abrasive, I think there needs to be more research done there. I personally don't think that most people who are using these machines are using them that often to where that's going to be an issue. If you were in a recording studio in the old days and you were running these machines 9 to 5 every day, right? And you're wearing out the heads just in general use, then maybe. But we had a hobby machine in our recording studio, and we had 50, 60 tapes, and we used the machine for 5 years and didn't see any discernible tape wear. So I just don't know. That might be a theoretical issue, but I don't know whether it's practically what really matters, right?
Do you sell any baked tapes on your website?
We have started selling some baked tapes. That was per customer request. I initially was doing what everyone else was doing, was tossing it all. Stripping it off the reels and just selling the empty reels. But I had some people request the tape, and I baked it, tested it to make sure that it wasn't sticky anymore, and I've had customers tell me that it's working out. So I started doing it reluctantly. I mean, it's stated that it's baked. I mean, it's not done without the customer knowing that it's what it is. But I'm cautiously optimistic that you can use the tapes again and be confident in them. One of the things I found is that the really old tapes, like they started making them in the mid-70s, and I have some of those here. One of the things about having access to tape from every generation, you can kind of see what happens over time. You can see that the older ones are worse than the newer ones, and I believe there will come a point where it's so bad that you can't even use them after baking.
Okay.
So I don't know at what point that is, but I believe that is going to happen. And that's why if you have something that you can easily dehydrate your tapes with or bake your tapes with, you can keep some of those tapes longer and use them.
All right. I think that's everything.
Maybe I'll just do a finale. A couple of things I want to show.
Yeah.
Right. Just a couple of things I wanted to show. Here's an Ampex tape that I just got. It's a classic 456. It's one of the classic tapes for the baking. You can kind of feel it through the windows. The tape doesn't move. It's baked and solid together. You can also tell by when you put your finger on the end, it feels a little sticky. You feel it. Something like this needs to be baked 8 hours, right? And this is a classic tape. Another thing here is an Ampex 406 on a plastic reel. Again, it's solid. You can't move the tape. It's solid against each other. This needs to be baked. In this machine, I got a bunch of Scotch 227, which was the Scotch competitor to 456 and 457. I have some 227 and 226. I'm doing some test baking on these. I haven't baked and used these yet, so this is my first one. Again, this was fantastic tape in the day. One of the reasons why people used this was the 456 and the Scotch. It's interesting how competition worked, but they leapfrogged the Japanese. The Japanese never made studio tape that could rival the Ampex and the Scotch tape. And then later, the Germans with BASF and AGFA brought out, which is now those formulas are made by Recording the Masters, but they brought tapes later out to compete with the American tapes, the Ampex and the Scotch. This stuff was the best at the time. This came out in the mid-'80s. These were the best tapes you could buy at the time for studio use, but they need to be baked. So just a couple of ways that you could test it yourself. I really don't like winding them to test. If you're going to wind them, you're going to only wind for the first 30 seconds, right? Because otherwise you might ruin the tape. I don't think the Scotch is quite as bad as the Ampex in my experience from how sticky it is, but it still has the same problem. Now, there are other tapes that go sticky in my experience, and baking doesn't necessarily fix them, right? So I've had some old lots of Scotch 207 that were made in Japan. I've had some Sony tapes that go sticky, the SLH. I've also had their ferrochrome tapes which go sticky. Baking did not fix those tapes. Same with AGFA 469. Baking doesn't fix those tapes. There's other failure modes. So the thing about the Scotch and the Ampex is that the sticky syndrome that is fixable by baking is so far really only applicable to those two brands of tapes. There might be others, but those are the two main ones where you can use baking, and it's well documented. People know about it. They've known about it for a long time. There's many people that do it. What's new is the idea of baking them with the intent of using them again. Right. That's what's new, other than just taking the music off.
Yeah.
So they come with multiple trays. There's comparable units available on eBay. There's some better units than this out there now, which I have some on order, with a little bit larger diameter trays, or even square trays where you have more room for the air to move through. But in general, these work well and are very inexpensive. This one has 5 trays, and then you put the lid on. So there's a fan, and it puts heated air through. There's 4 little vents on the top that allow the air to exhaust.